Hey, so I'm Zoe, 28, living in this cozy little one-bedroom apartment in a city that's big enough to feel anonymous, but small enough that you still feel connected. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer, and, well, life used to feel balanced. But recently, everything kind of spiraled out of control thanks to my sister and, wait for it, a police visit that changed everything. Before we dive in, I'd love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it in your corner of the world? It all started so subtly, like these things usually do. One Friday evening, my phone rang and it was my sister Louise, sounding frantic as always. "Zoe, you're a lifesaver," she said, her voice breathless, almost urgent. "Thomas has this last-minute work dinner and I have a massive client event I just can't miss. Can you please watch Leo and Mia for a few hours?" And honestly, the first time, I didn't even hesitate. I mean, of course I would. I love those kids. Leo, 8 years old, was this unstoppable ball of energy, constantly asking a million questions about dinosaurs, rockets, and random trivia that somehow made me feel smart even though I barely remembered half of it. And Mia, at 5, was this tiny whirlwind artist who could sit for hours, completely absorbed in her own world, doodling masterpieces with a box of crayons sprawled across the dining table. It wasn't just babysitting, it was fun. It was, I thought, a one-off favor for family. A few hours on a Friday evening, no big deal. Right, I cleared off my dining table, turning it into a fortress of coloring books, crayons, and Legos. I even ordered their favorite pizza because, well, they deserved it. And for that evening, it felt like the right thing. Little did I know, that night would be the start of something that would slowly, almost imperceptibly, take over my life. The next weekend came, and as if on cue, another emergency. Louise called again, her tone a mix of desperation and excitement. A potential client for her pharmaceutical sales job had suddenly decided they needed to meet for drinks that evening. It could mean a huge commission, she said. And then the guilt tripping started. Subtle at first, like a whisper, "It's for the kids' future. Don't you want to help them?" And I did. I wanted to help. I always did. I mean, that's family, right? You step in when they need you. But here's the weird part. I started noticing a pattern forming, this creeping expectation that I would drop whatever I was doing, no questions asked. The weekend after that, it was something else. A friend's personal crisis, she claimed. Then a mandatory team-building retreat somehow landed on a Saturday. Each request came with a sense of urgency so heavy, it was almost suffocating. And layered on top was this sprinkle of guilt tripping, the unspoken, relentless messaging that if I didn't step in, it wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic. Louise had a way of making it feel like the entire universe depended on me showing up, as if I was the only person standing between her and professional ruin, or some social disaster that would haunt her forever. Thomas was always conveniently tied up with his own demanding job as a financial analyst, which, according to Louise, was somehow a way of absolving him from the babysitting responsibilities. "You know how it is in the finance world," she'd sigh, like a reminder that my freelance gig wasn't even a real career. And, okay, sure, I understood the pressures of her world, but slowly, it started to sting. It wasn't just a one-off favor anymore. What had started as a few hours gradually bled into entire evenings, then full Saturdays, eventually whole weekends. My apartment, which had been my sanctuary of peace, creativity, and quiet, had unofficially become the go-to daycare and occasional crash pad for Leo and Mia whenever Louise had something come up. My one-bedroom sanctuary of books, art supplies, and plants had transformed into a chaotic satellite orbiting her hectic life. The weekends that were once mine time for my projects, for friends, or just for recharging now revolved around snack times, tantrums, nap schedules, and endless loops of children's television. Even simple things, like cooking for myself, became a challenge. My dating life practically non-existent. Who wants to risk bringing someone back to an apartment that might contain two sleeping children, a floor covered in Legos, and the remnants of a pizza feast I didn't even eat? My friends noticed, and not in a subtle way. The jokes started rolling in. Hey, Zoe, want to grab brunch Saturday? Oh, wait, are you on anti-duty again? They laughed, but it stung me because it was painfully true. I tried to shrug it off. I tried to understand. Louise and Thomas were just trying to build careers, save for a bigger house, give their kids the best of everything, right? That was the story I told myself, the narrative she sold me, and I bought it wholesale. Our parents, Ralph and Freya, were her biggest cheerleaders, reinforcing this expectation. It's wonderful that you're able to help your sister so much. Zoe, my mom would gush during weekly calls. Family has to support each other. When we were young, your aunt used to watch you and Louise all the time, conveniently forgetting, of course, that my aunt was paid for her time. My dad's a retired engineer that he is. Processed it in the most practical terms, efficient, cost-saving, makes sense. You're home anyway. Saves Louise and Thomas a fortune. Nobody seemed to consider the costs for me, emotionally or financially, because, yeah, the financial burden began creeping in. I was the one buying pizzas, movie tickets, juice boxes, chicken nuggets, foods I barely even liked. One time, gently, I mentioned the added expense. Louise just waved her hand dismissively. Oh, just add it to my tab. She laughed, a running joke, but the tab was never paid, and the frustration didn't stop at money. The slow simmer of resentment began building, growing hotter every time I had to rearrange my life for her convenience. It wasn't just the hours or the money, it was the lack of recognition. I wasn't seen anymore. My life, my plans, my needs, they didn't seem to exist. I was a resource, a convenience, and my front door became a revolving one for my sister. Each visit arriving with a rushed hug, a laundry list of instructions, and a promise to be back by 10 promises that always stretched well past midnight. And the thank yous, they were minimal, usually just to relieve "you're a lifesaver," as if I'd handed her a spare tire on the side of the road instead of sacrificing hours, entire weekends of my life. I felt trapped, caught in this endless cycle where saying no was almost impossible because of the guilt and conditioning instilled over decades. Family comes first. That noble mantra had been twisted in our household to mean that everyone else's needs came before mine. Louise was the star's successful career, perfect family image, high achiever. I was the quiet, artistic one, expected to bend, to accommodate, to erase my own schedule to fill in the gaps. Saying no wasn't just a refusal. It felt like betrayal, a fight waiting to happen. My parents would inevitably get involved, painting me as the selfish, unsupportive sister. But even with all of that pressure, the arrangement kept expanding. My work began to suffer. I started declining weekend freelance gigs that paid well because I couldn't promise the quiet focus I needed. My apartment, once my pride, gathered dust, cluttered with neglected projects and wilting plants. My mental health began fraying at the edges. I was constantly exhausted. And the joy I used to feel spending time with Leo and Mia, the genuine love for them, was slowly being replaced with dread, guilt, and a sense of obligation. I was beginning to resent them, a feeling that immediately made me feel worse about myself. One Friday afternoon, while scrubbing crayon off the living room wall, the realization hit me like a cold splash of water. This wasn't support. It wasn't helping family. This was exploitation. I hadn't signed up for this contract, and yet, here I was, suffocating under the weight of an unspoken agreement I never agreed to, forced into the role of permanent, unpaid babysitter. The way it started seemed harmless enough, just a few extra hours here and there, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began to eat away at my life. Weekends that used to feel like a gift of time for projects, friends, or even just lounging on the couch with a cup of tea disappeared entirely. Every Friday evening, I found myself scrambling, clearing my dining table, setting up activities for Leo and Mia, trying to anticipate every need before Louise even had the chance to guilt me into saying yes. My work started to take a hit. Deadlines I used to meet with ease now felt impossible because I couldn't guarantee the quiet hours I needed for my design projects. Each interruption, each last-minute call or text from Louise pulled me further from the focus and flow I once enjoyed. My freelance clients didn't care about family emergencies, they expected results. And suddenly, I was missing them. Turning down new opportunities because my own schedule had been hijacked. The apartment, once my pride, my sanctuary, slowly turned into a chaotic mess. Toys littered the floor like an endless Lego minefield. Coloring books were scattered across every flat surface, and the walls bore the faint but stubborn marks of crayon scribbles. My plants wilted, not from neglect alone, but from the sheer inability to tend to them with any consistency. Projects I'd started with excitement gathered dust. Reminders of the creative life I used to lead, now crowded out by snack breaks, diaper changes, and the relentless energy of two small children. I would glance at the half-finished designs on my computer screen and feel this gnawing frustration because I knew what I was capable of when uninterrupted. That potential was there, waiting, but I couldn't reach it anymore. And then there was the financial strain. Initially, it seemed like a small price to pay, ordering the kids' favorite pizzas, buying juice boxes, replenishing the stash of chicken nuggets, paying for movie tickets. But over time, it added up. I found myself spending hundreds of dollars each month on meals and activities for children who weren't even mine, things I didn't eat, in a house I maintained for free. I tried once, gently, to mention it, casually, like maybe she didn't realize the cumulative effect. Louise waved it off with a laugh. "Oh, just add it to my tab," she said, as though this were a running joke. And of course, the tab was never paid. Every attempt to bring up money became this weird, tense moment where I realized no one in the family saw this as a real issue. They assumed because I was willing, I was inexhaustible, impervious to the cost, my time, my money, my energy, none of it seemed to matter. And yet, despite all the inconvenience and growing resentment, I still loved Leo and Mia. That was the cruelest part. Leo's enthusiasm, the way he would leap into stories about dinosaurs or try to teach me facts about space, was infectious. Mia's little hands, covered in paint or crayon, creating worlds out of paper and imagination, would make me pause and smile. And I'd think, maybe this is why I'm doing this. It's family, right? You help the people you love. But even in those moments, the awareness of exploitation gnawed at me. The love I had for them was genuine, but it was wrapped in this layer of obligation that left me exhausted, frustrated, and increasingly bitter. The mental toll was enormous. I was constantly anxious, dreading the Friday calls, the sudden demands, the weekends that had no space for my own plans. I began noticing how much it affected my social life. Friends who used to invite me out would stop asking because eventually I had to decline. They joked, sure, about being on anti-duty for the weekend, but the laughter carried this underlying truth I couldn't ignore. I was missing out on my own life. Brunches, movies, casual coffee dates. Everything had to be weighed against the likelihood that Louise would call and I would have to drop everything. My personal life, the dating world, basically evaporated. Who wants to enter a relationship where you might not even have privacy or freedom on weekends? I started to feel invisible in my own apartment, my own life, because I was constantly pivoting to meet someone else's needs. Sleep became precious and fleeting, the constant back and forth, the stress of last-minute emergencies, the worry about whether I could satisfy the demands of work while also being a full-time stand-in parent kept me awake at night. I would lie in bed, replaying the calls, the texts, the subtle manipulations, and the heavy sighs that implied if I didn't say yes, catastrophe would follow. Every little favor felt like a test of my loyalty, my patience, my willingness to be exploited. The guilt was expertly applied, not maliciously at first, but effective nonetheless. I had been trained over years by family culture and expectations to believe that my primary role was to accommodate everyone else. And now, the consequences of that conditioning were impossible to ignore. The mental load wasn't just about logistics or stress, it was this creeping erosion of self. I began to feel invisible, like my own needs, wants, and ambitions didn't exist. Every decision became a question of whether it would inconvenience someone else, primarily Louise. Even small joys were tempered by the thought that at any moment, a call could come in, upending everything. I started questioning myself constantly. Am I being selfish for wanting time to myself? Am I overreacting for feeling resentful? But deep down, I knew the answer. I wasn't being selfish. I was being human. And yet, the guilt persisted, a familiar, heavy companion. The pattern, which had seemed harmless, had solidified into a routine. My apartment became a quasi-public space for Louise's convenience. My work, which had once been my pride, my creative outlet, became secondary. Social engagements were skipped or canceled, financial strain mounted, sleep and mental health suffered, and even though the kids were delightful, the joy of spending time with them was replaced by a sense of dread. The emotional labor of maintaining patience, keeping the apartment safe and entertaining for them was draining. I felt like a doormat, and every small act of kindness was taken for granted. My heart wanted to care, to help, but my mind was screaming that something wasn't right. It took a lot of moments like this, scrubbing crayon off the wall or sighing at another last-minute emergency, to finally piece it together. This wasn't just a family favor anymore. This wasn't support or mutual aid. It was one person taking advantage of another's kindness. It was exploitation dressed up as obligation. And that realization, though painful, was liberating. I started to see the pattern clearly, the way my time, energy, and resources had been steadily co-opted without consideration. How my own needs were dismissed, and how my boundaries had been eroded until I no longer recognized the person I used to be. I loved Leo and Mia, but I began to understand that love doesn't mean being endlessly exploited. Support from family doesn't come with the expectation that you surrender every weekend, every ounce of your mental and emotional energy, and a good portion of your savings. The realization hit me hard, like a wave washing away the last remnants of denial. This was not normal. This was not fair. And if I wanted to reclaim my life, my sanity, my creativity, I had to start drawing a line. I had to acknowledge the cost, not just the financial or practical cost, but the emotional and psychological toll of being treated as an unpaid, disposable babysitter. The resentment that had been quietly simmering for months finally became undeniable. Every favor, every small act of generosity had been manipulated into something that benefited everyone but me. And yet, despite all of this, I still felt guilty. Because I loved the children. That love, though, didn't have to mean sacrificing myself entirely. I started to realize that there was a way to care for them while also protecting my life, my work, and my mental health. But it would require something I hadn't done before: setting boundaries. It would require saying no, not just sometimes, but when it was necessary for my own well-being. And that thought, frightening as it was, also carried a sense of possibility. I could still be Zoe, the creative, kind, capable person I had always been, without being a doormat for everyone else's convenience. I could still love my niece and nephew without losing myself in the process. Looking back, it's wild to think how quickly a few small requests snowballed into months of sacrificed weekends, abandoned projects, and a persistent undercurrent of guilt and frustration. The subtle manipulations, the relentless emergencies, the way my apartment became a revolving door for someone else's life, it all added up. I wasn't just tired physically, I was exhausted mentally and emotionally. The lines between love, obligation, and exploitation blurred until they were almost impossible to distinguish. But that clarity, when it finally came, set the stage for a decision that would change everything, realizing that my generosity had been exploited, and that it was time to reclaim my life, my space, and my sense of self. That Friday started like any other, or at least I thought it would. The sun was shining. I'd just landed a promising new client, and I was looking forward to a weekend that was entirely mine. No interruptions, no last-minute crises, maybe even a quiet dinner out by myself. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had plans, my own plans. I was going to visit a new art exhibit on Saturday and spend Sunday completely offline, just reading, recharging, enjoying a little peace. I felt light, almost giddy at the thought, and then my phone buzzed. The familiar ringtone I had assigned to Louise. My heart sank a little, but I tried to stay calm. I let it go to voicemail, convincing myself maybe it wasn't about the kids this time. Maybe it was something else, a quick question, a bit of news. But then a text came through immediately after. Zoe, pick up. It's an emergency. My stomach dropped. My hand trembled slightly as I dialed her number. What's wrong? I asked, my voice tight, trying to steady myself. Oh, thank God, she breathed, a perfect blend of panic and relief in her tone. Listen, something huge has come up. Thomas and I have been invited to this last-minute weekend getaway with his boss. It's at a lake house, super exclusive, massive networking opportunity. It could mean a promotion. We have to go. She paused, and I waited for the inevitable. So, I need you to take the kids, she said, her voice shifting from urgent to expectant. I can drop them off in an hour, just for the weekend. We'll be back Sunday night. Just for the weekend. The words echoed in my head, mocking me. It had never just been for the weekend. My art exhibit, my quiet Sunday, my sanity, everything was about to vanish if I said yes. And this time, something inside me snapped. The guilt, the obligation, all of it was still there, whispering at me, but louder than that, my own needs were screaming. I took a deep breath and said, quietly but firmly, no. It was a small word, barely above a whisper, but in the silence that followed, it felt like a cannon blast. Louise laughed, a short, sharp sound that carried disbelief. What? Zoe, I don't have time for jokes. This is important. I'm not joking. Louise, I said, my voice gaining strength. I can't do it. I have plans this weekend. There was a pause, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, trying to process this unprecedented rebellion. Plans, she finally scoffed. What kind of plans could possibly be more important than my husband's career? Are you meeting a friend? Just cancel, they'll understand. They're my plans, I said firmly, and I'm not canceling them. This is the 5th weekend in a row you've asked me to take the kids. I'm not your built-in babysitter. The shift in her tone was instantaneous. The manufactured panic vanished, replaced by cold, sharp anger. Your built-in babysitter, is that what you think this is? This is family helping family. This is me trying to build a better life for my children. And you're complaining about having to spend time with your own niece and nephew. I love Leo and Mia, I countered, keeping my voice steady. But I also have a life and a job. You don't respect my time, my home, or my money. You just assume I'll drop everything whenever it's convenient for you. Her voice rose in pitch, shrieking, "Oh, I don't respect you. I'm the one managing a high-pressure job, raising 2 kids, running a household. You sit at home on your computer all day. It's not that hard to watch a movie with them. You're being incredibly selfish." Zoe, the word hit me like a slap. Selfish. The word my family had wielded over me for years as a weapon. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt like a badge of honor. Maybe being selfish was just another word for having boundaries. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said. Calm now. Detached. But my answer is no. You and Thomas will have to find another solution. There are babysitting apps. You have friends. I am not an option this weekend. "You can't do this to me," she yelled, voice cracking. "I'm already packed. The kids are expecting to see you. What am I supposed to tell them?" "You can tell them Auntie Zoe has a life of her own," I said. "Or you can tell them the truth that you and their father failed to arrange proper childcare before making plans." There was a sharp intake of breath, followed by the threat I knew would come. "Fine. I'm calling Mom and Dad. We'll see what they have to say about their selfish, ungrateful daughter who won't lift a finger to help her own family. Do what you have to do," I said. And for the first time, there was a strange sense of peace settling over me. The line had been drawn. I hadn't backed down. I hadn't caved. I hadn't apologized for existing outside of her needs. My hands were shaking, my heart racing. But for the first time in months, I felt a sliver of victory. I had said no. I had protected my weekend. I had stood up for myself. And it felt incredible. I thought the tension from that phone call was the worst of it, but I had no idea how quickly things were about to escalate. About an hour after I hung up with Louise, there was a loud, insistent knocking at my apartment door. Not the casual knock of a neighbor or the soft tap of a delivery person. It was heavy, authoritative, and it sent a jolt of anxiety through me that I couldn't shake. My first thought, almost immediately, was that Louise had driven over herself, probably with the kids, ready to confront me in person and escalate the drama further. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, preparing for another round of her accusations and guilt-tripping. Slowly, I walked to the door and peeked through the peephole. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just Louise. There were 2 uniformed police officers, standing sternly in the hallway under the harsh fluorescent light. Their presence immediately made my stomach drop. Confusion, fear, and disbelief collided in a strange knot in my chest. Why were the police here? Was a neighbor complaining? Was there some emergency I had missed? I felt my hands trembling as I unlocked the door, leaving the chain on for my own safety, a fragile barrier between me and the unknown. "Good evening," said the taller officer, polite but firm. "Are you Zoe Miller?" "Yes," I squeaked, my voice barely carrying the weight of my shock. "Is everything okay? We received a call requesting a wellness check." "Ma'am, that's not," the second officer explained. "There was a report of a disturbance and concern for the welfare of 2 young children at this address." Children. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. Children. There are no children here. I live alone. The officers exchanged a quick look, and the first officer's voice remained calm but measured. "Ma'am, the caller, a Miss Louise Forrester, stated that her 2 children, Leo and Mia, were supposed to be in your care. She said you had an argument and she was now unable to reach you and that she was concerned for their safety." I was frozen. The audacity of it was staggering. Louise hadn't just called my parents. She had weaponized the police, lying straight to them to intimidate me. A hot, furious wave washed over me, momentarily eclipsing my fear with raw anger. "That's an absolute lie," I said, my voice shaking. "My sister and I had a disagreement on the phone an hour ago because I refused to babysit this weekend. Her children have never been here. They are with her. She is lying to you to harass me." The officers were neutral, professional, maintaining their composure as they did their job. "We understand, ma'am, but we still need to verify that there are no children here," the taller officer said. Humiliation burned in my cheeks. My neighbors were starting to peek from their doors. A mixture of curiosity and concern painted across their faces. A police visit was a rare, dramatic event in our usually quiet building. I felt my reputation, my sense of safety, crumbling right there in the hallway. But I knew that refusing their request would make me look guilty. With a resigned nod, I said, "Fine," and unlatched the chain, opening the door wider. "Come in. Look wherever you want." The officers stepped inside. Immediately, their presence made my small apartment feel claustrophobic. They moved quickly, respectful and methodical, glancing into the bedroom, the bathroom, the closets. In less than a minute, they had confirmed my account. My apartment was quiet, tidy, and conspicuously child-free. "All right, ma'am. It's clear there are no children here," the first officer said, softening slightly. "I'm sorry to have disturbed you." Just as they were about to leave, my neighbor from across the hall, Benedict, appeared. He had been watching the commotion, and his expression shifted instantly from curiosity to concern. Benedict was a lawyer, quiet and thoughtful, someone I'd exchanged pleasantries with in the elevator a few times, but he had a calming presence that grounded me immediately. "Is everything okay, Zoe?" he asked gently. Stepping into the hallway, "My sister called them," I blurted out, the words tumbling from my mouth in a mix of anger and embarrassment. "She lied. She said the kids were here and she was worried for their safety, all because I wouldn't babysit." Benedict's eyebrows shot up, clearly concerned, and he glanced at the officers to confirm my story. "So, to be clear," he asked, "you were dispatched here based on a false report?" The taller officer nodded. "It appears so. The caller alleged her children were here and potentially in danger. We found no evidence of that." Benedict's legal mind kicked in, and he spoke with a calm authority that made me realize the gravity of what had just happened. "Filing a false police report is a serious offense," he said. "It ties up emergency resources and can be used as a tool for harassment, which seems to be exactly what happened here." He looked at me directly. "Zoe, did you get the officer names and badge numbers? You should absolutely file a report of your own." I hadn't even thought of that. I was still reeling from the shock, the humiliation, the sudden escalation of a conflict that I thought was just about babysitting. But hearing Benedict speak, seeing the situation through his eyes, ignited a spark inside me. This wasn't just family drama anymore. Louise had crossed a line, using the law to manipulate and intimidate me. It was calculated, malicious, and it had consequences. After the officers left, Benedict stayed in the hallway, his presence a comforting anchor as I struggled to process everything. "Are you all right?" he asked again, softly. I shook my head, tears of frustration finally welling up. "No, I can't believe she would do this. It's insane. It's more than insane. It's illegal," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He nodded firmly. "Look, I know this is a family matter and technically none of my business, but if you need advice on how to handle this legally, you should absolutely do it." What she did was deliberate, calculated, and malicious. For the first time all day, I didn't feel completely alone. Benedict's calm, rational presence gave me perspective I had desperately needed. It shifted something in me, the stress and frustration I had been carrying, the resentment, the guilt, the feeling of being trapped began to turn into determination. I realized in that moment that I could fight back. I could take control of the situation rather than letting it control me. Louise had miscalculated. She had assumed that fear, guilt, and humiliation would keep me in line. She was wrong. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of empowerment. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing to assert myself, to set boundaries, to take action. That day, standing in my own apartment, shaken but resolute, I understood that this was the turning point. I could no longer allow myself to be exploited, and I would not be intimidated into compliance. I had to fight, not just for my sanity, but for my life, my time, my peace. And in that moment, with the officers gone and Benedict's reassuring presence by my side, I knew I was ready. After the chaos of the police visit, I woke up the next morning with this strange mix of adrenaline and clarity. My anger and humiliation had coalesced into something else entirely: determination. Louise had escalated things beyond a simple family squabble, and it was clear she had tried to use the law to intimidate me. I realized that if I wanted to reclaim control, I couldn't just react emotionally. I had to gather the facts, expose the lies, and plan my next move strategically. This was going to be deliberate, calculated, and precise. I started where I knew best online. My graphic design work had honed my digital skills, giving me a good sense of how to dig for information without raising suspicion. I opened my laptop and began with the basics, searching for any mention of Thomas's company hosting a corporate retreat at a lake house. I combed through press releases, corporate social media pages, and employee posts, but found nothing. No announcements, no check-ins, no tagged photos. Everything that Louise had described simply didn't exist. It was the first solid indication that her story was fabricated. Next, I turned my attention to Louise herself. Her social media was a carefully curated highlight reel, a world of perfectly staged family photos, motivational quotes, and check-ins at trendy restaurants. Everything was meant to project success and happiness. But I knew that even curated feeds could reveal cracks if you looked closely. I started digging into her friends' profiles, focusing on those who were more than casual acquaintances, people who were part of her inner circle and who might inadvertently post something revealing. That's when I found Kendra. Kendra was notorious for oversharing, the type of person who couldn't resist posting every detail of her life online. I navigated to her profile, which was thankfully public, and scrolled through her recent posts. My heart began to beat faster when I saw a group photo posted just 2 hours ago, 6 people, laughing, holding champagne glasses on the deck of a stunning modern house, overlooking a sparkling lake, and at the center of it all, with her arm wrapped around a man who was clearly not Thomas, was Louise. The man had a confident smile, and the way Louise leaned toward him, laughing freely, was a stark contrast to the frantic, responsible sister who claimed she had a work emergency. I felt a rush of disbelief mixed with a cold clarity. There it was, the truth staring me in the face. Louise hadn't gone to a networking event. She had gone somewhere completely personal. I saved the photo, screenshotting the image and the timestamp, and began cross-referencing with other posts to piece together who this man was. Every detail mattered. This wasn't just about catching her in a lie, it was about gathering irrefutable evidence to support my case when the time came. But I couldn't stop there. I needed to ensure that Thomas knew the truth too. He had been largely absent from these supposed work events, often with an excuse from Louise that I now suspected was fabricated. He was the most wronged party in this scenario, size, and he deserved to know what was really happening. Obtaining his contact information without tipping off Louise required careful planning. I called the main line at his investment firm, spinning a story about organizing a surprise birthday celebration for Louise. A helpful receptionist, oblivious to the real stakes, provided me with his direct cell number. My heart pounded as I dialed, rehearsing what I would say. When Thomas answered, his voice was cautious. "Hey, Zoe, I'm not sure Sunday's usually my day to catch up on things." I cut him off, firm but controlled. "Thomas, this is important. I need you to come to family dinner at our parents' house this Sunday. No excuses. It directly concerns you and your family. Please don't mention this call to Louise." There was a pause, and then he said slowly, "Okay, I'll be there." Relief washed over me, knowing he would witness the evidence firsthand. With that piece in place, I shifted focus back to preparing the confrontation. I began organizing the photos, posts, and documents into a single folder, my arsenal of truth. Each piece was carefully labeled, time-stamped, and cross-referenced to ensure there would be no wiggle room for denial. I wanted clarity, precision, and impact when I finally presented it. The goal wasn't revenge, it was truth. Every screenshot, every rental agreement for the lake house, every social media post, all of it would lay bare the sequence of lies Louise had crafted to manipulate her family and intimidate me. As I worked, I noticed a change in myself. The fear that had gripped me during the police visit was transforming into something else: confidence, a sense of purpose. Every detail I uncovered, every step I took to involve Thomas, reinforced that I was no longer a passive participant in this family drama. I was the one setting the stage now. I was creating a narrative based on evidence, not hearsay, and that gave me a powerful sense of control. I could feel the tension in my shoulders ease slightly, replaced by a quiet determination. I was no longer just surviving the chaos, I was orchestrating the outcome I wanted. I also began anticipating the confrontation, imagining the reactions, the questions, and the moments of disbelief. I rehearsed calmly explaining each piece of evidence, preparing for the inevitable denials and excuses. I visualized the room, the seating arrangement, and how I would place the folder in front of Louise, Thomas, and our parents. Each mental rehearsal strengthened my resolve. I felt a strategic clarity I hadn't known I possessed. For years, I had been the quiet, accommodating sister, absorbing the family dysfunction in the name of peace. But now, I was planning a deliberate intervention, one that would ensure the truth was seen, acknowledged, and impossible to ignore. In the days leading up to the family dinner, I continued to refine the evidence, double-checking every post, every timestamp, every detail. I made notes about key points to emphasize, moments where body language or phrasing could reinforce the narrative. I felt a thrill of empowerment mixed with the lingering nerves, knowing that this confrontation could change everything. By the time Sunday arrived, I wasn't the anxious, guilt-ridden sister who had spent months sacrificing her weekends. I was deliberate, prepared, and confident. I had transformed the frustration, the humiliation, and the exploitation into a focused plan, ready to assert my boundaries and demand accountability. This wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. It was a carefully orchestrated exposure of truth. And I was finally in control. Sunday arrived with this heavy electric sense of anticipation. I wasn't just going over to my parents' house. I was walking into a carefully planned moment. A confrontation that I had spent days preparing for. Benedict came with me, his calm presence grounding me as we entered the familiar driveway. He was dressed in smart casual attire, professional but approachable. Someone who could lend both reassurance and authority if needed. I carried the tote bag with me, a bit heavier than usual, filled with the organized folder of evidence I had meticulously compiled: screenshots, rental agreements, social media posts, timestamps, everything laid out to leave no room for doubt. My mother, Freya, opened the door first, her smile faltering slightly when she saw Benedict beside me. "Zoe, and you've brought a friend," she said, eyes flicking between us, trying to mask curiosity with civility. Mom? Dad, this is my neighbor, Benedict, I said, stepping inside. My father, Ralph, extended his hand, sizing him up with the same meticulous engineer-like scrutiny he always applied to new situations. Louise and her family were already there, and I immediately felt the tension in the room spike. Louise shot me a venomous look, the anger from our previous phone call still simmering in her expression. She clearly expected me to arrive, apologetic, sheepish, possibly even intimidated. Seeing me with Benedict, confident and calm, seemed to fuel her irritation further. Thomas, sitting at the dining table, looked tired but alert, glancing at me with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Leo and Mia, oblivious to the undercurrents, ran to hug me. I hugged them back, a pang of sadness hitting me as I thought about the storm their parents' actions were about to cause. We made it through the initial pleasantries, the usual niceties of Sunday visits. My mother had prepared her customary roast, the smell filling the air, a comfort that now felt incongruously heavy, almost surreal. We sat at the table in a way that reflected the underlying family dynamics perfectly, my parents at either end. Louise and Thomas on one side, and me and Benedict on the other, a clear line of separation between the two camps. My mother tried to steer the conversation towards safe topics: the weather, a neighbor's new car, my dad's recent golf game, but the tension was palpable, electric, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Louise couldn't resist testing the waters. Her voice was syrupy sweet, almost theatrical. "So, Zoe," she began, glancing at me with a faux innocent smile. "Finally found time in your busy schedule to grace us with your presence. I hope we're not interrupting any of your very important plans." The room went silent, everyone listening, the air thick with expectation. This was the opening I had been waiting for. I placed my fork down, took a slow breath, and, calm and even, responded. "Actually, Louise, my plans from last weekend are exactly what I wanted to talk about." I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the folder, placing it gently on the table with a soft but deliberate thud. My father leaned forward slightly, frowning, curious. "What's that?" he asked. "It's a collection of documents," I explained, my eyes locked on Louise. "It's about what happened last weekend. I think it's time we all got on the same page about the facts." I began sliding the first document across the table toward my father, a copy of the police report from the wellness check at my apartment. His brow furrowed as he read, and my mother leaned over, hand flying to her mouth in shock. Thomas's head snapped toward Louise, eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. "You called the cops on your sister?" he asked, voice low, incredulous. "I was worried. Louise insisted." She stammered, shrill and defensive. She wasn't answering her phone. "That's a lie," I said, calmly, firmly. "You were angry because I wouldn't cancel my plans to accommodate yours." I let that hang in the air for a moment, letting everyone absorb the gravity of her actions. Then, reaching into the folder, I pulled out the next piece, a high-resolution photo of Louise on the lake house deck, her arm around a man clearly not her husband. I placed it carefully in the center of the table. The effect was immediate. Louise's face went pale, draining of color. Thomas's eyes widened in disbelief, his face a mixture of horror and dawning understanding. My parents looked from the photo to each other, confusion etched across their features. "Who is that man?" "Louise," I asked quietly. Each word deliberate, she stammered, eyes darting around for an escape. That's just a friend," she said. Voice trembling, I slid the printouts from Kendra's social media post next to the photo. "Because your friend Kendra called it a birthday celebration for Julian. And according to the rental agreement for the lake house, which I also have here, the property was rented by a doctor Julian Croft, not Thomas's company. There was no corporate retreat. Was there, Louise? The room was silent, the tension almost suffocating. Thomas slowly pushed his chair back, eyes locked on the photo, not looking at Louise as he asked, voice dangerously low. You told me you were at a work event. Why did you lie? Why did you lie to me, and why? When I refused to be your accomplice, did you lie to the police? I turned to my parents, my voice calm but firm. She didn't overreact. She wasn't worried. She acted with malice because I was a threat to her secret weekend trip. She tried to discredit me and intimidate me by sending the police to my home. My father looked from the documents to Louise, his expression grim, processing the undeniable evidence before him. The narrative he had accepted for so long was collapsing in real time. Louise, he said, voice heavy with disappointment, is this true? Louise burst into tears, a last resort for a manipulator who had run out of lies. She's twisting everything. Zoe has always been jealous of me. She's trying to ruin my life. But Benedict, who had been quietly observing, spoke up with measured authority, cutting through the drama. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, he said, addressing my parents directly. I'm here as Zoe's friend, but I'm also a lawyer. I want to be very clear what Louise did by calling the police is not just a family matter. Filing a false police report is a criminal offense. It carries fines, and in some cases, jail time. Zoe would be within her rights to press charges for both the false report and harassment. The word criminal hung in the air, thick and heavy, silencing any remaining murmurs. My parents stared, absorbing the reality of the situation. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was undeniable truth. Thomas finally stood, his chair scraping against the floor, and turned toward Louise, his face a mask of hurt and betrayal. We're leaving, he said, voice cracking. Leo, Mia, get your coats. He shot me a flicker of gratitude with his eyes. Thank you. Zoe. Without another word, he gathered the children and walked out, leaving Louise scrambling, sobbing, and calling after them. But Thomas didn't look back. The perfect image she had built, her facade of a flawless family life, crumbled on the dining room floor. The room fell silent, the aftermath almost deafening. My parents were frozen, staring at the evidence spread across the table, the comforting smell of the roast now feeling nauseatingly incongruous. My father, the engineer who lived in a world of black and white, finally spoke, weary and defeated. You knew this would destroy her marriage, he said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. I corrected gently. Her actions destroyed her marriage. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see. For months, you both told me to support her, to be the good sister, to put family first, but you never asked if she was being a good sister to me. You enabled her and guilt-tripped me into being her doormat. The police showing up at my door was the end of that. My mother started to cry softly. We just wanted everyone to get along, she whispered. We never thought, I said firmly. We never knew she was lying. That's the problem. You never asked. You just assumed I was the one who needed to be more flexible, more understanding. You assumed she was the one who deserved all the support. I looked at Benedict, who gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. From this moment on, things were going to be different. Boundaries would be drawn. My home, my time, and my peace were mine. I would no longer be the default problem solver or babysitter. My help would be given on my terms, not demanded. I stood, gathering the evidence into the folder, my voice steady as I told my parents. I love you both, but my relationship with you needs to change too. It has to be based on mutual respect, not my willingness to sacrifice my life for Louise's convenience. We left shortly after, the drive back quiet, heavy with reflection, but lightened by the fact that the truth was finally out, and justice, in its own small way, had begun. The days that followed the confrontation were a whirlwind, but the truth had shifted the entire dynamic. As expected, Louise tried to launch a smear campaign, sending furious texts accusing me of being vindictive, manipulative, even suggesting I had hired someone to spy on her and invent a story to break up her marriage. She painted herself as the victim, the wrong sister, but the evidence was too clear. Her version of events couldn't hold up against the documents, photos, and social media posts I had presented. Thomas, finally, fully aware of the truth, refused to stay silent. He told his family what had really happened, exposing the lies and her manipulations. Her carefully constructed image of the perfect life began to crumble. Within 2 weeks, Thomas filed for divorce, moving out of their home and securing temporary full custody of the kids. He cited Louise's instability and deceitful behavior, the false police report, and the affair she had hidden, all backed by the evidence I had gathered. The consequences hit Louise hard. She was forced to move out of their beautiful suburban home into a small, overpriced apartment, left to manage her life and her children without the illusion of a perfect support system. Financial reality and responsibility were no longer optional for her, and she felt the weight of her actions firsthand. My relationship with my parents was strained for a while. Naturally, they had spent years defending Louise, defending her choices and behaviors, so accepting the truth about her actions wasn't easy for them. We had several difficult conversations, some tense, some awkward, and a few that left all of us quietly reflecting. But for the first time, I didn't back down. I reiterated my boundaries clearly and calmly, letting them know that my support was no longer automatically available and that their assumptions about my willingness to accommodate Louise's chaos would no longer hold. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to understand. They started calling me to check on how I was doing, not to ask for a favor or guilt me into someone else's convenience. My father even called one day to apologize. "We should have listened to you, Zoe," he said simply. "We weren't fair to you." And that simple admission meant the world. It was a validation of my efforts to assert myself, my choices, and my boundaries. Life after that began to blossom. My work flourished as I reclaimed my time and space. Projects I had previously put on hold were now getting the focus and care they deserved. I could approach my freelance assignments without the looming pressure of last-minute babysitting demands. My apartment, once chaotic and cluttered, returned to being the sanctuary I had always loved. Quiet mornings with coffee and music, evenings filled with uninterrupted creativity, weekends planned entirely for me, these became my reality. And Benedict, our friendship deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. What had started as neighborly support evolved into something more meaningful. We began having dinner together, exploring art exhibits, sharing ideas, and discovering a shared understanding of life, values, and ambition. He saw me for who I truly was, respected my boundaries without question, and never pressured me into anything I wasn't ready for. With him, I could be my full self, appreciated for my mind, my creativity, and my perspective, not just my willingness to accommodate someone else's needs. Months later, one quiet evening on my balcony, watching the sunset with Benedict, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It was Louise. Short and startlingly different from her previous furious messages. "I know it's too late, but I'm sorry. You were right. I messed everything up." I showed it to Benedict, unsure if it meant anything or if it was just another attempt at manipulation. "Do you think she means it?" I wondered aloud. "Maybe," he said gently, taking my hand. "People can change, but that doesn't mean you have to let her back in. Your peace is the priority now." And he was right. I didn't reply. Forgiveness might come someday, but trust is something else entirely. And I had learned that boundaries and self-preservation are not negotiable. I had drawn my new borders, not out of spite, but out of necessity, out of self-respect. For the first time, I was putting myself first in a way that didn't feel guilty, didn't feel selfish. My world, my time, my peace, these were mine. And with that freedom, happiness and clarity returned. I had faced the storm, weathered it, and emerged intact, stronger, and finally, truly free. And that's Zoe's journey, learning to say no, setting boundaries, and finally reclaiming her life. It's a powerful reminder that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for your peace and happiness. Think about where you might need to set your own boundaries. If this story struck a chord, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or pass it along to someone who might need a little inspiration. Sometimes protecting yourself is the bravest choice you can make.